it's one of those things where it's like you kind of know it when you see it. If there's any hesitancy about you bringing it up, you probably should. And I think it's more of a feeling than an inaction than anything. Me posting on LinkedIn about the things that I've been through, that's a very superficial layer of vulnerability. I mean, I can write about what the shit I've gone through and post it online all day, but it doesn't really mean anything unless you're like really connecting with a person like we are, or like you're connecting with a therapist, or I'm connecting with my wife or any of my buddies.
All right, episode number 33 of the 38 Challenge podcast. Today we have Greg Van Dyne. Greg is a former Green Beret Medic, MBA from University of North Carolina, and a leader in the medical device space. Greg, thank you so much for coming on today, brother.
Yeah, man, pumped to be on here. It's about time. Had to reschedule with you a couple times.
Yeah, no worries. How are the kids? They got a little sick?
Kids are good, man. Kids are good. They're back. They're resilient little animals, man.
100,
Feral, but they're resilient.
100%. Yeah, man, I've been loving following you on LinkedIn. Just feel like every day, every time you post something, I find value from it. So continue to spread the message and spread the knowledge. And I'm excited to pick your brain and learn more of your experience today.
Heck yeah, man. I'm excited too.
So why don't you tell us a little bit of your military service, kind of where you grew up and why you decided to join the military?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so Seattle. Obviously, not a super, I wouldn't say not a super military supportive environment, but I mean, obviously, it leans heavily Democratic and liberal.
And it's super sunny.
So not a, not yeah. So me going into the military was a shock for everybody that was in my circle growing up, at least. I think I always wanted to do it. It was something that kind of just was always a burning desire inside me. I told my mom when I was 18, I was like, hey, I'm going to the military. She's like, no, you're not. Ended up going to the University of Washington, got my degree there, and then did a year working after graduating, and just hated working behind a desk, and talked to a couple of PAs that were prior military, and they turned me on to the 18 Delta Special Forces Medical Sergeant career path, and told me basically there's an 18 X-ray contract that you can sign that sends you straight through the pipeline. So I knew at that point that, I needed to sow my wild oats and get it out of my system. So I gave it a go and signed up. And so I was at 18 X-ray, went through the entire pipeline, got my choice as a medic, ended up over at 10th Special Forces Group over here in Fort Carson in Colorado Springs, and did a couple of deployments throughout Eastern Europe, went to Afghanistan, and ended up getting out in 2020. And from active duty, went over to 19th Group, which is National Guard, in 2021, and got out completely. So my story is, I got out in the middle of COVID, and I mean, that's a whole nother conversation that I'm sure we'll get to. But that's kind of sort of my military background. Was on a mountain team, and super into climbing now, and picking it back up. So that's been a huge boost to my mental health recently.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So what did that transition look like?
Yeah, so I came right off of a trip to Afghanistan in 2019, had my first kid while I was there, flew back for a week, was right back in the country after that. And, that fucked with me quite a bit, going from seeing the birth of your kid, going straight back to war, and, all you want to do is just go back to your kid, and you have a job to do, but it's super hard. It was very hard for me to separate myself from that, just because there's just that extra life that's now a part of you. So got back from the deployment in 2019, and had surgery on my right ankle, had torn all the ligaments, and decided at that point I was like, okay, I need to get out and focus on my family. Can't do another deployment. And So I got out in the middle of COVID and really had sort of just like completely isolated myself from my whole community. Like, so when everything shut down, I go off and start my next journey and like completely lose contact with like all of my buddies because everybody's locked down. As soon as lockdown's over, they're all deployed. So I really lost like my entire support structure. And it was just it just ate at me. It didn't really have the support structure in place to deal with that transition, and it got pretty lonely.
Hmm. So you transitioned. Did you go right into medical device?
Yeah, I got right into medical device and um, started working there. Was on the road quite a bit. Just kind of, I guess, masking everything that was going on with me by pouring myself into my work,
Mm.
and that was definitely was not a healthy outlet.
Yeah, man. So before we kind of jump into what that time might have looked like, I see on the content you're putting out, you're always harping on vulnerability and talking about it, which I love and respect. I'm curious, how would you define vulnerability?
Oof, that's a tough one. Um, it's just being willing to share things. It's one of those things where it's like you kind of know it when you see it. If there's any hesitancy about you bringing it up, you probably should. And I think it's more of a feeling than an action than anything. Me posting on LinkedIn about the things that I've been through, that's a very superficial layer of vulnerability. I mean, I can write about what the shit I've gone through and post it online all day, but it doesn't really mean anything unless you're like really connecting with a person like we are, or like you're connecting with a therapist, or I'm connecting with my wife or any of my buddies. That's real vulnerability is actually talking with somebody and having the guts to have that conversation. I mean, that goes for, just tough conversations in general. You know, being upfront with somebody is not something you do online.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of times, and even in my own life, right? Like posting on social media, like talking about the experiences that I've had, and that doesn't feel that. I mean, it is very vulnerable, but like you said, like that's not what vulnerability is. Vulnerability is one, having the courage and the strength to show up for yourself and to get help when you know that you need it, and to have the strength to have a conversation with someone that you love, to continue to show up and continue to have those conversations, to go to a therapist, right? To keep trying. That's what vulnerability is, right? Not seeking attention on social media, which I can see for a lot of people. They could see. I don't want people to get that confused at all.
Yeah, and I think that the best thing about being vulnerable online is the conversations that come because of it
Mm-hmm.
offline, right?
Absolutely.
That's the reason that I continue to post stuff like that, is because each time I do it, somebody reaches out to me and says, "You know what, man, I'm dealing with the same stuff and I need help." And being able to steer them in the right direction, and just that being a first step for a lot of people, is huge for me. That's what I get out of it, is the fact that someone, because of what I'm about to write or post, is that's going to spur somebody into action and realize I'm not okay and I need to do something about it.
Absolutely, man. So why don't we get into your story? And it sounds like when you were transitioning out during COVID, which my brother was doing the exact same thing, and like we don't even know the numbers of the amount of people who were struggling and who took their life during that time. Why don't you walk us through kind of what that dark period looked like for you?
Yeah. I'd say like my rock bottom was probably, close to a year ago from now. And it was just a series of a lot of bad decisions. It was like just like a complete sense of like I didn't have any purpose, and it was so frustrating for me because I had these two beautiful boys. I have an awesome wife. We have two great careers. Everything, was going in our direction, and I couldn't shake it. And it was terrifying. It was defeating. Um, there was just no reason for it other than I couldn't wrap my head around it. And that was, I think, the hardest part. And you go from the military where like I had literally spent the last 8 or 9 years like completely devoted to one thing. Every single time I did a deadlift, I did it because I wanted to become a better warfighter. Every single rep that I did, everything I did was so focused. I was so narrow focused on that. Um, it was like fight or flight at its like extreme, and I carried that over into my personal life, and I had no outlets to try to make sense of it. Wasn't seeking help. I didn't have any friends to tell them like what I was going through because everybody was gone, and I and at that point, like even the people that I was still connected with, it was like I was so far gone that I had no interest in reaching out to them. And it honestly, it took a struggling marriage to, and completely on my side,
Mm-hmm.
to like really be like, okay, man, like you've got to fucking figure this out or you're gonna lose everything. Um, so that's ultimately what, spurred me into action and said, okay, I need to get right.
So was it that your purpose was being a warfighter, and then having that being stripped away from you, that you think that you weren't sure what your reason for living was? I mean, because obviously you said you had a job and you had a family. Was it that having that purpose that was so black and white, and then having it being stripped away from you?
I think that has a lot to do with it. So that combined with just like behavioral things like from the fight or flight, that I just like everything was just like zero sum. It's like either you with me or against me. And like most of the times, like if you were talking to me, I thought you were against me. Um, and in feeling like you left your brothers behind, feeling like you left stuff on the table, like, like the military, I wanted to make it a career. I just knew that if I wanted to have a good family life, that it probably wasn't the best direction for me. So it's just like dealing with like all those conflicting things, then coming off of deployment, all the stuff you see there. It was trying to rationalize everything that you went through and not being able to, um, not wanting to. It was just, a combination of all those things that really all came to a head.
So, and I don't love asking this question, but I think it's good for people to know. I mean, because I've felt it in my own life. What did what did the depression kind of feel like for you, and in the day to day? Like, what did it look like?
Yeah, I mean, it was doing it would be like walking through life with like, for me it was just walking throughout life with like zero intention. Like nothing I did mattered, nothing I did was, I was just on autopilot. And um I think that really fucked with me because you go from, again, being so purpose driven to like just like walking through life. And um it just felt like I was going nowhere, and I just do not like that feeling. It was, I mean, it was crippling because I wasn't like working out as much. I just like everything that I was like had just been stripped.
Yeah, man. And that's what That's what depression can do, and that's what it does. Takes away from the joy of doing the things that you used to do, right? The motivation and yeah, man. So when did you get to the point where, or I guess the first question, did you ask for help, and what was that process what did it look like to get there, to ask and to be vulnerable?
Yeah, my wife forced me basically to get help. It was like a put up or shut up type deal. And that's really what like spurred me into action. And I think that there was even like some reluctance there, even like with her telling me like you need help. It's like you just in that moment you just feel like you're help, like there's nothing that's going to help you. Like talking to somebody is not going to help me. Like I can like they just don't, like, they're not going to understand what I'm going through. They're not going to be able to help me. But I mean, there's just tons of, like, EMDR therapy is a huge one. I'm just starting that, and like there's just so many different paths out there to get help that I wasn't open to. But it really did take like my wife just like thank God I had her in my corner, because that was like the only reason I did get help.
Absolutely. So when you, first of all, I think that's an important thing, right? Having someone call you out and say, hey, like, you need help. You need to go get help. And that's a very hard and vulnerable thing to do, is telling someone that you love, say, hey, like, having the strength that your wife had to look at you and say, hey, man, like, you really need help.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I guess like not only like just like talk from like my wife's perspective, like, and that girl's a badass, because she's been going through, was going through postpartum depression as well, like during that whole this whole time, and still like had the cojones to like keep it together and like keep our family together. So I mean, forever indebted to her for all of that. But that's, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation.
Absolutely. And that's real love, man.
Yeah.
When you're going through your own depression and your own struggles, and you're still looking for ways to help other people, like, there's no greater form of love than that.
Yep.
So when you started to get help, walk me through that process. Like, what are things that you did? Um, what was the kind of timeline, and when did things start to get better?
Yeah. So I think that, like, one of the most important things about, so I reached out to the Wounded Warrior Project. They hooked me up with a counselor. Didn't see eye to eye with the counselor, just wasn't a good fit. And I think that's one thing is that people need to be aware of, is the fact that you might seek help and you might not like the person that you're getting help from. So it's kind of like speed dating at first. Like, you need to find the person that's gonna be the right fit for you.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest with you, I haven't found the right therapist for me, but I've continued to shop around, and just having just being connected with like multiple different therapists. You're still talking, right? And you're still like getting out there, and there's still tidbits that you can get from um, each person that you interact with. Um, but just you can be picky. Like, you don't have to talk to the first person that comes your way. And that's one thing that I've kind of taken to heart, is that, I don't, it's okay not to be okay with the person that you're talking with. Like, just keep going and keep talking and keep trying to find something that you jive with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So besides therapy, are there other things that you did to kind of, as you are walking and battling through this depression, through this darkness, other things that you did that helped?
Yeah. So I mean, when I got put on Zoloft, that's been like a big help. Is, I mean, there's like some sort of chemical imbalance that's going on with me, where I need it. And it's been a huge help. I remember day 3 of being on Zoloft, and like just like taking it that morning and looking at my wife and just like breaking down crying, because like I just like it was just such a huge sense of relief being able to like just not be in that fight or flight mode for the first time in I don't know how long. And it was just like the most freeing feeling I think I've had in maybe ever, is just being on that medication. I hope that I won't have to be on it forever. But that's certainly like got me kickstarted in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I think there's a there's a stigma about medications. I mean, there's a stigma about everything that surrounds mental health, but I think the important part is, like you said, you have to find what works for you. And it could be the first counselor, it could be the fifth counselor, counseling might not be for you. It might be medication and making sure that, you have those imbalances fixed. Could be psychedelics. I mean, whatever it is that can help you, so long as you keep taking steps and keep showing up. That's the important part. So when you started to kind of step away from this fight or flight mentality and your decisions, how did that start to change your day-to-day life?
I think that the biggest thing is just like being able to, I mean, you hear this all the time, just like being able to be present and not have to be like on guard all the time. Sort of just, it's like being myself. It was like me being okay with being myself and being able to walk through life like in my own skin and feel comfortable doing so. That was like the biggest change. And like wasn't short with my kids anymore, wasn't short with my wife. Was able to like start like I think the biggest thing is that once I started taking action is that like all of these things, like I realized, oh, okay, I can have a habit of working out again. I can have a habit of like prioritizing my marriage. And it's like you just start asking yourself like these like super simple questions, like, okay, what do I need to do to get my marriage right? Okay, we should probably go out on dates, at least like twice a month. Okay, what do I need to do to like get some alone time before my kids like wake up? Okay, I just need to like wake up an hour earlier and get some journaling done or write my content for the day, whatever it is, just have like a little bit of quiet time by myself. What do I need to schedule in working out? Okay, so I work out every single day at 1:30. I go and do yoga. Like that's my routine. I don't deviate from it. But just like I don't know how I lost sight of that, but for some reason, like once I started getting help, like those are the things that clicked into place. Is like, okay, I just need to like put this shit on a calendar and say like I'm doing this. And that's really where I started noticing like things started spiraling in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. What are some of those habits that, I guess, yeah, what are some of those habits that you do every day?
Ice baths.
Oh yeah, love it.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I know. I saw that you guys did an episode on it. What was it, your last episode,
Yeah,
32?
yep.
Yeah. Yep. So I do ice baths every day. Um, those are fucking awesome. And
What time do you do your ice bath at?
I generally do it right after I drop my kids off from daycare. So like probably like around like 7:30 or 8:30. Um, Still need to figure out what I'm going to do in the summer because right now I'm just relying on Mother Nature in Colorado. But yeah, that's been a big one. Yoga daily. Now I climb Monday, Wednesday, Friday with a couple of my buddies that I was on a team with. And what else do I do? I mean, my wife and I try to get out and do a date night every 2 weeks. That's a big one. But as far as daily ones, yoga. If I'm not climbing, I'll do yoga, some sort of cardio. Um, but just like those small things, and then writing daily is another big one. Like those like three or four things. Like it's funny what like all comes into place just because of the you choose like you walk onto three or four, and then like slowly your daily habits just start changing, and you're like all of a sudden, okay, like I just got done with my ice bath. I know it's like time to start working. Start time blocking your schedule. So you're like, okay, so 8:30 to 9:30, I'm gonna go and prospect. 9 to 10, I'm going to go and like respond to all the emails from yesterday or whatever it is. But everything seems to fall in place if you just have like those pillars of good habits to kind of guess like kind of build off of.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Um, what does your content creation look like? What does that process look like every day? Is that kind of when you're journaling? Is that like one and the two when you're creating your content?
Yeah, that usually comes from journaling. I just use the Notion app, and like I'm just like if anything pops into my mind, I'll just like slowly write it down there and kind of just build off of each idea. I don't have anything like super structured. I don't schedule my posts or anything like that. I do post at the same time, but it's all just kind of like I just build it as I go. Nothing is super formalized, which I probably should. I probably should set aside some time to actually like build out some content and like kind of stack it so I'm not like always morning of like finalizing and editing and stuff like that. But that'll come.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of your content you talk about leadership, and a lot of the times you talk about being vulnerable and being a leader. How do you see being vulnerable play into the importance of being a leader?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think the the old like authoritarian style of leadership is dead. Like there's really no room for it. And even I would argue in the military nowadays, you'll have a hard time connecting with your folks if you're not willing to be vulnerable. They're just not going to come to you for issues. And they're just if you're going to be a hard ass, like that's and draw that line. And just don't expect people to come to you with their issues because it's just not going to happen. And that's really the beauty of vulnerability is that if I can fuck up, then so can you. And if I can fuck up and tell everybody that I fucked up, then guess what everybody else is going to do? They're going to do the same. And that's really the only way in which you can, because inevitably people are going to mess up and that's
Mm-hmm.
just it's just life. And if they can't come to you, you're going to find, and that's your fault as the leader if they can't come to you, plain and simple. um that's where vulnerability comes into play. I think that one thing that like all leaders need to take note of is like how many complaints do you get from your team? Because if they aren't complaining, I think Colin Powell has a quote about this. I don't know what it is, but it basically says like if your troops aren't coming to you with their issues, then there's something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and it's likely you.
Absolutely. Do you have an example of a time where you've been vulnerable as a leader so people can, kind of see what it looks like in action?
Yeah. I'm trying to think back to so there was one operation when we were in Afghanistan where we were at our exfil point. We took two chalks, so we took one round of UH-60s came in, and they took off, and then two other birds came in, and the rest of then as soon as they landed, like the entire fucking valley erupted, and um, as we were like all funneling on, we were trying to get a count. I fucked up the count, and I counted 67, and we were supposed to have 68. And this was like total between the two birds. And because I fucked it up, like we thought that we had left somebody on the objective, which obviously for the ride into back home, it was like I was like, fuck, like obviously this is terrible. Everybody thinks that we just fucking left somebody, and I didn't have to tell anybody that it was my count. Like there was a couple people, and as soon as like we got back and like we counted up, we were good, and we had everybody there, and I fucking owned it, and like I messed up, and that was that, and like that's just nothing like that's just one example, right? It's like that's just one little slip up that I could have just swept under the rug and we could have been good. But if I don't own it, like that becomes the culture. And that was my fuck up, so I owned it.
Because you fucked up and had that, had that sense of ownership. Did you see that same pattern being shown by your team as well?
Yeah, I mean that was already the culture on our team where we had a pretty solid team. And maybe the reason I did it was because that was the culture. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Maybe if things were turned the other direction and we had a shit team and like everybody hated each other, then sure, maybe I don't say anything, right? I'd like to think that I would, but I'm also not in that situation, right? So I think we have a tendency to regress to the mean, and that's the unfortunate truth. And you can have a really good soldier that goes bad because he's in a shit culture.
absolutely. And culture is so important. I think that vulnerability is not talked about enough in culture, right? Especially in business, where you can have the freedom to say that, as you mentioned, right? The freedom to say that you messed up, the freedom to ask for help, the freedom to talk about anything that you're going through. That is such an important part of any team that you're on. And I feel like it's trust and vulnerability go hand in hand. I think they're the two most important things for team building, which you touch on all the time.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's a tough one in the corporate world because nobody. I think that's where like veterans have a very special place in the corporate world, because you go from like a place where like everybody's in your Kool-Aid and in the military, and like I mean you got to make a strip map to where you're going to be taking leave, to like the corporate side where um, nobody gives a shit. Like if you're going to leave, just tell them you're taking PTO, and that's that, right? Um, and nobody, like military veterans, don't want that. They don't want everybody in their Kool-Aid, but they also like don't want everybody to like not be in their Kool-Aid, right? We want somewhere in the middle, and I think that that's where a lot of veterans like can really help organizational culture, because that is certainly like a missing link that I've noticed being over in the corporate world.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I want to transfer over, as we talked about before the conversation. It sounds like you've had your fair share of experiences with traumatic brain injuries. So I wanted to talk about TBI for a little bit. What experiences have you had with traumatic brain injuries during your time of service?
Yeah, so I've never had like a really bad concussive event, but I have been around a ton of explosions, and that's where I think a lot of awareness needs to be built up, is the fact that every single time you eat a charge at a door, that's an MTBI. Every single time you shoot off an AT or anything like that, that's a MTBI. And those add up. And I do truly believe that probably has something to do with where I'm at, on a mental health journey. It absolutely has something to do with it. Something's off in my brain because of that, and it might not be the leading cause, but it's certainly contributing to it. So I have a very soft spot for concussions, and um, trying to, I guess, get better about recognizing them and treating them.
Yeah, man, absolutely. 414 since the last statistics that have been out. 414,000 TBIs since 9/11 and 114,000 suicides. Right after one MTBI, your chance of suicide doubles. And like you said, when you have multiple concussive blasts, it when you look at the numbers, it starts to make a lot of sense. And we, like you said, we have to do more for awareness. We have to do more for treatment. And I'm glad you have that understanding, because I feel like, and I think it's starting to come out a little bit more, but people have to understand that there's damage to your brain, and that it's not you, right? It's not, there's a actual physical damage because of the service that you've provided for this nation, that you might be experiencing some of the thoughts, some of the behaviors, some of the actions that you're dealing with.
Yep, I'm with you 100% there. Yeah, I think that is, I've never really I guess thought about it that way, but that's a really good point, is that, that's just one less thing to like pin on yourself, right? Is that, hey, and I mentioned this earlier, like there's something chemically off, right? That where you just need help, and that's okay. Um, yeah, I think that's definitely important for people to know and to feel.
Absolutely. So I run the military programs for the Concussion Legacy Foundation. So my job at Project Enlist is to help further research through getting veterans to pledge their brain, so that we can understand how traumatic brain injuries are impacting someone's mental health. And my question for you is, would you be willing to pledge your brain so we can help further awareness and further the treatment and research?
You can have my brain.
Thanks,
You can
man.
definitely have my brain.
I
Yeah, yeah,
appreciate
that's
that.
awesome. I think that's huge. I wish I would be able to find out what's going on, but I guess I won't. It's all right though.
I mean, the goal is, one, to give answers to families who, it might not make any sense. And if you donate your loved one's brain, then you can start to get answers and start
Yeah.
to understand maybe why they were behaving in a certain way. I think that's one important piece. And then also, like we said, to take some of that burden off of yourself, right? To understand that, hey, this is nothing that is wrong with me. There's just an injury, and people need to become aware of that. And there are things that can help, right? Cold exposure, yoga, a lot of things that you're doing, right, to help with your brain health. And that's just the awareness that we have to create.
Yep. 100%. I feel like someone just like recently said this, but like you wouldn't blame somebody for getting cancer. You know what I mean? And you shouldn't blame somebody for having mental health issues. It is what it is. It's just another sickness that sometimes we don't have a whole lot of control over.
Yeah, and you have to do whatever you can to help treat it, right? Because
Yep.
it's as debilitating as cancer and some of these things, right? You just there's this whole stigma around mental health, and as we've talked about, whatever it is that you can do to help your own mental health, you have to show up for the people in your life and for yourself.
Yep.
So
100%.
I want to hear more about CallSign22. Is that the it's coming out in
Yeah.
a couple of days, right?
Next week. Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna launch it. Yeah. So I was having a conversation with one of my buddies like 2 months back. And it was, similar to a conversation like this where we were just talking about, our mental health struggles, and um, been really, really leaning into like talking with like other veterans and other people that I used to serve with. And we got off the phone. Well, we got off the phone. The last things we said to each other was, if there's something we can collaborate on, we should try to make it happen. And then it just like hit me like right after we got off the phone. I immediately texted him back and I was like, dude, what do you think about this? CallSign22, 22 calls to people you served with over the course of 30 days to reconnect you back in with your community. Because I talked about this earlier. Is like that was like I truly believe, had I been forced or had I just made a more of a concerted effort to stay connected with the people that I served with, I it might not have ever gotten that bad, because those guys knew me extremely well and would have been able to like kind of just say, hey man, you got stuff going on and you need to address it. And so that's where a CallSign22 came about. And so we are partnering with the Kindbridge Research Institute, and all of the funds we raise for that are going to be going towards their military treatment fund. So just helping vets find mental health resources. A lot of really, so our plan is to do a challenge every quarter. So this one is the 22 calls over the course of 30 days. Some other ones that we've talked about is doing like a suicide pact. So the VA has these safety checklists that if you fill, or I think it's a safety checklist that you fill out with a peer, and it's like you talk about, and you write down, what does it feel like when you're spiraling? Who do you contact when you're spiraling? What are some key signs and symptoms that, like, hey, you're going down that route? And then it has like a list of resources. And they found, gosh, I wish I had the statistic pulled up, but they did a study that said like doing that suicide pact reduces suicide by up to like 70% or something like that. So I think that will probably be our next movement, is like trying to get like 100,000 people to fill that out. And really, we just want to become like the biggest grassroots social movement to move from awareness, where we are right now with like push-ups and all of that, to something actionable, which is, making calls, doing the suicide pact, and try to make a difference that way.
I love it, man. Yeah, and anything that we can do from the 38 challenge, we will absolutely help. We did one of the things that I tried to do was call 38 people 38 days in a row, and I will say that calling someone was way harder than anything physical, right? And it just goes to show that being vulnerable, asking for help, calling, having emotional, down to earth conversations is harder than, doing any amount of push-ups or sit-ups or squats or any of that. And it's far more important. And that's the reason for the workout that we created, is to show people that, hey, this is hard, but what's way harder to do is to be vulnerable and to ask for help and to, just show up and make 22 calls in a month. And I know that is going to help a lot of people. So I absolutely love that, man. And we're going to help any way that we can.
I appreciate you, man. That's awesome. Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So when you're making these calls, and I'm sure inevitably you're going to come across some guys who are in that spot, in that dark place. What is one piece of advice that you would give to that person?
Yeah. So, we've talked about this quite a bit. And one of the things that we've, sort of thought about is the fact that, like, so 90% of people that attempt suicide don't recommit it again, or don't try again to commit suicide. So what does that tell you? It tells you that it's a very in the moment type of decision. And what we're hoping is that, like, maybe it's 8 things that cause you, that's that 8th thing that spirals and is like, I've had enough, like I have to end things. And we're hoping that, maybe we're catching it on the 4th or the 5th, before that 8th trigger that causes somebody to go to that place. But my biggest thing is, like, if that's you, I mean, just, it's human. You're okay. Like, I mean, it is so human to feel that way. And you are most certainly not alone. And I know that for those people, it's going to be very hard to feel that they're not alone, but you're not. You're very, very human. And I think that that's the most important thing that someone can feel leaving a conversation like that. And if you're the person having the conversation with that person in the dark place, just, well, do what you got to do. I mean, fly out to that person. I'll pay for your flight if you need to, man. Like, just go and give that person a hug and don't let them go.
Absolutely. And it's such a human experience that a lot of humans don't talk about, right? And I think that another part, if you're helping someone through that, which has helped me, is people explaining that they've been in that same exact spot, right? And that they made it through, right? And that this feeling like anything else is going to pass as well. I think that is such a helpful and important piece. So I love that piece of advice, right? Is understanding they're human. If you're having the conversation, let the other person know that too. Say, hey man, like this is completely normal and you're gonna get through it. And I'm gonna help you through it.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Man.
I mean, I think just know, like, in those moments, just knowing that someone is there for you and is not gonna, like, that for me, that was my wife. Is she was, not gonna leave my side. And having that reassurance during those times is huge. It's huge.
Absolutely, man. Last question for you. What does the 38 challenge mean to Greg Van Dyne?
A lot of things, man. I think that what you are doing is incredible, and it's having the conversations that we all need to be having. Um, we need to start leaning more into our community and having these types of conversations. This should, I'm what I hope is that conversations like these spur conversations outside of this podcast for other people to say, hey, you know these guys were talking, like, I need to go have that conversation with somebody else. And not only that, but I mean, like, when listening to all the other podcasts, and there's just a ton of wisdom that's being shared here about people that have experienced this. It goes back to that humanness and like reconnecting back to just the feeling of being human and just knowing that that's okay. But also just a bunch of tips and tricks like the cold plunge and talking about that. That's huge. That's been a huge, it has truly been, I don't like saying life altering things but that has been like a seriously life improving intervention for me, is doing the cold plunges and just talking about things like that and different ways to approach this problem, whether it's doing psilocybin or ayahuasca or any of those alternative therapies. Like, just getting out there talking about this and putting mental health out on like the forefront is huge, man. And I'm just so grateful to have people like yourself just out here fucking crushing it and spreading actionable awareness.
I appreciate it, man, and that's the whole purpose of these conversations, right? Is to someone like yourself who has been there, who, like any human, still struggles, like I struggle. We have to have these conversations, and the purpose is to empower other people to, to have the same conversations and to show the same level of vulnerability and strength that you have in your life and you have today. So, man, I appreciate you so much for your time. I appreciate you so much for just your openness, and I'm looking forward to CallSign22 and anything that we can do to help you, man.
Again, man, I appreciate you. This is a blast.
Yes, sir. All right, Greg. Take care, brother.
Later.
Peace.